You're listening to the Taylor Marshall Show at episode 119. Today we're talking about the cardinal virtue of justice and how it affects your life. Howdy, and thank you for tuning in to the Taylor Marshall Show. This is the podcast for everyone who wants to create daily habits and want enough theology to take their faith to the next level. And my goal this week is to introduce the virtue of justice and how it can reshape your life into a pattern of excellence, success, and spiritual holiness. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to the podcast. I want to thank everyone who's listened, who's promoted the show on Facebook and on Twitter, and especially everyone who's given a shout out and rated this podcast on iTunes. Over 500 of you. We've had over 1 million downloads, coming up on 1,100,000 this week. So thank you so much for making this show the success that it is. Before we get into the show, just what's going on in my life. I've been doing this lately, and I think people like it, so I'll keep doing it. Our eighth baby, who is a girl rather, Margaret, turned 1 year old this past weekend on the feast of St. John Paul II. We had a fun little party with her and a cake with candles on it. If you go to YouTube, on my YouTube channel, you can see her being presented with her birthday cake, and she looks pretty happy. It's pretty cute. You can watch the little video of us singing happy birthday to her. Let's see. I'm planning a hunting trip to Montana with my brother. It's going to be really exciting in the spring. We're both really looking forward to that sometime after Easter. We haven't bought the tickets yet. I love Montana. All the Montana listeners, howdy, shout out, love your state. It reminds me of a beautiful cold version of Texas. The people in Montana remind me of Texans, which I think is awesome because I'm a Texan. Let's see, this weekend I'll be going to my alma mater, Texas A&M, in College Station, Texas. And I'll be taking two of my sons to their first Texas A&M Aggie football game with my dad, who's also an Aggie. That'll be fun. And I've heard from a lot of you about the pilgrimage that we're thinking about putting together to Fatima and Spain and France for next year to celebrate the 100-year anniversary of Our Lady of Fatima in her apparition message to the world. So please keep the messages coming. If you want to join us, let me know over at my site, taylormarshall.com, or you can find me on Facebook and message me there. I have two Facebook pages. I have Taylor Marshall, which is my personal, and then I have Dr. Taylor Marshall, that's the public one. Please, if you would, go to the Dr. Taylor Marshall one, because that's the one that we check for those kind of messages. I'm not too often on the personal one. Okay, so this week we're looking at justice. And we're going to skip the proverb of the week because we have a lot to cover with justice. In fact, justice in the Summa Theologiae by Thomas Aquinas is the virtue that gets the most ink. That's right, Thomas Aquinas spends the most time talking about justice, more so than prudence, which we did last week. Definitely more than fortitude. He actually spends the least amount of time on fortitude, and more than temperance. So for Thomas, there's a lot to say about justice, even more than when he writes on charity, the supernatural virtue. Now, why is that? Well, underneath justice, Thomas stacks a lot of sub-virtues. For example, religion, patriotism, because justice is giving another his or her due. You can think of it in terms of obligation. You could think about it in terms of rights, but that's more of a, post-Enlightenment category. Before the Enlightenment, people thought of ethics and the way they lived their quote-unquote lifestyle in terms of obligation and primarily duty. In Latin, through Cicero, duty is officium, and it comes into English as office. The reason that your office is called an office is because that's where you do your duty. It's your officium. And if you've listened to our Maccabee Society podcast, that's a podcast that I've done with my buddy Jared Zimmerer over at MaccabeeSociety.com. It's a men's site, a men's podcast. Women can listen to it, but it's men oriented. We talked about why men should try not to have a man cave, but instead have an office or a library. And we talked about why that is and how it relates to virtue and plan of life and so on and so forth. And part of it is because an office denotes officium, your duty as a man. It's not a cave where a Neanderthal goes to gnaw on a bone. An officium, an office, is where a man goes to fulfill his duty. And I think that's a better way of looking at it. So justice has to do with duty, has to do with obligation. If we were going to think about it in a post-Enlightenment philosophical construct, we could talk about rights. The difference between duty and rights is this. A duty is something that you owe to another. A right is something you demand from another. Now, duty and right can fit together. For example, let's just look at myself and my children. My children have a right to be fed by me. I'm their father. But the only reason they have a right is because I have a duty to feed them. So it's kind of, looking at a coin on different sides, duty and right. However, whenever humans look at it from the rights side, we can become very selfish and very confused. We can enter into what's called an entitlement complex, an entitlement mindset, where we think people owe me instead of thinking about what I should do in my duty. Society works better when we think about our duties and not what everybody else owes us by right. So yes, we can say every child has a right to be fed by their parents, but that right derives from the duty of the parent to the child. That makes sense? So justice in the Catholic tradition and in the philosophical tradition, going back before the Enlightenment, before Protestantism, is rooted in officium, in duty, in giving what is due, just like the word duty, giving what is due to another person. So if I don't feed my children, I'm sinning against justice. Last week we looked at prudence. Prudence is making right decisions. So if I refuse to weigh out all the different variables in a very important decision and make a mistake, that's a sin against prudence. But not giving someone their due in accordance with my state in life, that's a sin against justice. So justice, you can kind of think of it as the scales. They need to be in balance. So, Thomas goes on to explain the parts of justice. And by the way, if you want to follow along with me, in your Summa Theologiae, we are in the second part of the second part, in Latin, the secundae of the Summa Theologiae. As I mentioned last week, this is because Thomas wrote the Summa in 3 parts, first part, second part, third part, but the second part is so big that the second part is broken into 2 parts. We might call it 2a and 2b. In Latin, they call it the first of the second part and the second of the second part. In Latin, Latin secunda secundae partis. The second of the second part. Kind of complicated, but if you read the Summa, that's how you find it. You go to the second part of the second part. And if you're confused about this, but you want to get into Thomas Aquinas, I have a free book for you at taylormarshall.com that introduces you to Thomas Aquinas, introduces you to the Summa, and it's all in 50 pages, so you can read it in 1 or 2 sittings. If you want to go deeper, I would encourage you to join the New St. Thomas Institute. This is where I teach online classes on philosophy, theology, apologetics, church history, and we have a module in there with several video lessons that shows you which Summa Theologiae of Thomas Aquinas you should buy if you want to physical hard copy in your hands, which is the best one to buy. And then also we show you how to read the Summa, because it can be a little bit complicated when you start. And then we have some interviews with some people explaining how they read the Summa in 1 year and how you could be motivated to get deep into Thomas Aquinas. So if you want to get into Catholic apologetics, Catholic philosophy, you need to begin with Thomas Aquinas, and we've created all these resources to jumpstart you. Okay, so we're in the second part of the second part, and justice is covered by Thomas Aquinas in questions 57 all the way through 122. So question 57 through question 122. And here Thomas talks about introducing justice, and then he talks about the parts of justice. He talks about restitution. So what happens when you borrow your neighbor's lawnmower and then you break the lawnmower? In justice, there is something owed. There is a due. There's a duty to your neighbor because you borrowed, through his goodwill, you borrowed his lawnmower and you broke it. So I think all adults who have been taught ethics know the answer is that you should fix it or replace it. That's restitution. So that's an element of justice. Then he goes on to talk about the vices contrary to justice. As we mentioned before, all virtues are patterns of good and right action. Vices are patterns or habits of bad action. And Thomas lists the vices against justice as those that commit injury against one's neighbor. And so he lists, for example, in question 64, the sin of murder. Obviously, murder is a sin against justice. Why? Because you are taking away what is owed to someone else. Now, we're not talking about war or self-defense. We're just talking about murdering someone. You're taking their life. That's owed. That's due to them. You're taking it. As humans, we have a duty to protect human life from conception to natural death. If we don't, we're sinning against justice. He then goes on to talk about bodily injury. You know, if you take a sword or an axe and just randomly chop off someone's arm, that's not just. You're robbing what is due to them. That is the use of their body. Then he goes on to talk about theft. Same thing. If you take a belonging of someone else, that is unjust because that belonging is due unto them. If your neighbor has a car that they earned themselves or they received or maybe they inherited, it's theirs. You take it away, you're going against what is due unto them. Again, a sin against justice. Then he goes on to talk about verbal injuries. So those were all physical, murder, bodily injury, theft. This is all either killing the body, injuring the body, taking something physical away from the body. But then he goes on to talk about how the sins against justice can be verbal. And he enters into legal court language here. He talks about the judge, the accuser, the defendant, the witnesses, and the defending attorney. Now, how can we sin against justice verbally? Well, in all of these ways, we could use our words to take away that which is due to another person. And we do this by disguising the truth, deceiving, outright lying. And this can be done by the accuser. You could go and say, this person tried to kill me. This person tried to rape me. This person tried to poison me, whatever it is. And that's a sin against justice. You could be a false witness, bearing false witness, and say, oh, I saw that man drive off in that person's car. Again, you're taking away what's due to that person, in this case, the truth. It's being taken away. And then he goes on to talk about ways in which there are verbal injuries against justice that are not in court. So you can see here he's subdividing verbal injury into court. This is legal. And then outside of the court, or what would be called extrajudicial. And here he gives us 5 verbal injuries that are contrary to justice. The first one is reviling. Now, Thomas defines reviling as robbing a person of their honor. He quotes Jeremiah 20:10, "I heard reviling on every side," in order to show that reviling consists of words, and that it's a sin against justice. He also quotes St. Augustine, who says, "The reviling proper so called and is done in some kind of signs." Now, according to St. Augustine, quote, "Compared with words, all other signs are very few, for words have obtained the chief place among men for the purpose of expressing whatever comes to mind." Then he goes on to St. Isidore, quote, "The reviler is hasty and bursts out in injurious words." So reviling is seeking to injure someone with words. There is no knife, there is no gun, there's no hatchet. The tongue is the tool of injury. The injury in words can be from parent to child or child to parent, spouse to spouse, friend to friend, even stranger to stranger. When we revile another person, we seek to create a wound with our words. And it's our robbing away of their honor. Now, sometimes harsh words do need to be said, but they take prudence, and that brings us back to last week's virtue. We have to be rooted in prudence so we know what the right and what the wrong thing is to say. So that's reviling. The next one is backbiting. Backbiting is, of course, talking behind someone's back, using secret words. This would not be going up to someone's face and saying, "I think you're a blankety blank blank blank," and insulting them. That would be reviling them. This is seeking to take away their honor through talking about them to third parties. And here Thomas quotes Ecclesiastes 10:11, which says, quote, "If a serpent bite in silence, he is nothing better than a backbiter." So, a backbiter is like a serpent that strikes in silence. You don't even know you've been bitten. In fact, this should be our proverb of the day. That'll be our proverb of the day right there. Ecclesiastes 10:11. "If a serpent bite in silence, he is nothing better than a backbiter." The teeth have sunk in. The poison is there, but you don't even know it. Why? Because everyone in town is talking about these nasty words that someone has said about you. Now, the third one is tale-bearing. Now, tale-bearing is very close to backbiting. In fact, Thomas Aquinas goes to great lengths here to show how they're distinct. And even in my mind, I don't see how they're totally distinct, but I'll give you Thomas Aquinas' explanation. He's citing the gloss on Sirach 5:16, which says, quote, "Be not called a talebearer, a whisperer. They differ, however, in end, because the backbiter intends to blacken his neighbor's good name, wherefore he brings forward those evils, especially about his neighbor, which are to defame him, or at least to deprecate his good name. Whereas a talebearer intends to sever friendship, as appears from the gloss quoted above and from the saying of Proverbs 26:20, which says, quote, "The talebearer is taken away, contentions shall cease," end quote. So the difference that Thomas sets forth here is that the backbiter is going about in secret to defame you and to take away your honor, whereas the talebearer is doing the same thing, but in order to sever friendship. So the goal or the intention is distinct. That's how Thomas describes it as being different. Again, I don't see a real firm distinction there, but I can see what Thomas is saying. The fourth one is derision. Derision seeks to take away the honor of the person, not by destroying their name, not by ending the friendship as in the previous two, but as in bringing about shame to the person you deride. So Thomas says, the backbiter deprecates a good name, The talebearer destroys a friendship. The derider intends to shame the person he derides. End quote. And then derision, of course, relates to the Latin word for laughter. So this is done in jest. It's making fun of someone, bringing about laughter against that person, and ultimately bringing in them the sense of shame because people are laughing at them, not with them. So that's derision. And then the fifth and last of these sins against justice in words are cursing. Cursing, which is a mortal sin. And cursing is bringing down a judgment upon a person, or as Thomas shows, upon a thing. For example, our Lord cursed the fig tree as an allegory of those who do not bear fruit. But cursing is a calling down of judgment upon a person or a thing, but chiefly a person. And Thomas shows that cursing can be just and can actually be good. We find God cursing. We find cursing in the Old Testament. We find Christ cursing. All of these are calling down a judgment against immoral behavior, rather. And so cursing itself is not per se sinful, but when we curse and there is no immoral cause for it, that becomes a grave sin. So we can't call down curses on the innocent. We can't call down judgment on those who have not done evil. We can't call down God's wrath or God's curse when people have done nothing to deserve that or to merit it. Again, it's not giving the person their due. Hence, it's contrary to justice. Thomas then moves on and he talks about sins against justice that have to do with commerce. One is in cheating and buying and selling. So you buy from me 50 bushels, but I make all the bushels a little bit smaller and I actually only sell you 48 bushels. That is not giving you your due because you paid for 50. The other one is usury in loans. And a lot of people have questions about this. In fact, you'll hear people say, well, the church can change its teaching on certain doctrines because the church used to teach that usury was a sin, and now the church doesn't teach that usury is a sin. No. The church has always taught that usury is a sin, and the church still teaches that usury is a sin. The difference is that in the last 500 years, humanity has gone off a gold standard. They've gone off a standard of bartering that relates to real items. And now we have a fiat currency, which is paper or units printed by national banks, treasuries. So the dollar bill. The dollar bill doesn't really represent anything. It's actually a measurement of debt. That's all it is. And since the government can print these pieces of paper and we use them for commerce, there's always inflation involved in human commerce. And because there's inflation involved, there has to be adjustments made over time, especially when you're looking at loans that are spread over 10, 15, and 30 years to take into account the expansion of money through inflation and also risk over time using these currencies. Because in the old days, a piece of gold was a piece of gold now or 30 years from now. A plot of land was a plot of land 30 years from now. Nowadays, however, the measurements, the units of commerce are in flux and are changing, and hence the way loans are structured are very different. That being said, if you said, hey, I need to borrow $20,000, I said, okay, you're in a hard place. I'll give it to you at 50% interest. That's usury. Guess what? It's gravely sinful. You cannot do that. Even at the First Ecumenical Council, Nicaea, they said that there could be loans. They just couldn't be over a certain percent. I can't remember what that percent was. So as early as 325, the church is allowing loans. They just don't allow the interest to be ridiculous, beyond reason. All right, then Thomas kind of anticipates, or actually not anticipates, returns to what he said in the first part of the second, and I wrote my PhD dissertation on this topic, which is the fundamental principle of natural law, that is to do good and to avoid evil. All natural law is built on to do good and to avoid evil. Thomas handles that again here in question 79. Then Thomas spends the rest of the questions from 81 to 122, so 41 questions on the virtues, the sub-virtues of justice. And this is, I think, a really beautiful part of the Summa. He subdivides justice into, for example, religion. Religion is based in justice. You might say, well, isn't religion based on faith or charity? No, Thomas says that religion is based in justice. Why? Because religion per se is giving God his due. You see what he just did there? He expanded human relationships, not just with one another, from father-child, spouse, employer-employee. He expanded it in a metaphysical way and went supernatural and says, well, what does man owe to God? God is a personal being. And what we owe to God is the virtue of religion. So what do we owe God? We owe him our worship. We owe him our thanks, our gratitude. We owe him outward, formal rites of worship. We owe him the honor that we teach his precepts and his existence and his power to the next generation. We owe him prayer. He even says that we owe him bodily reverence through external acts of latria. What is latria? Latria is the worship owed to God, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. As Catholics, we have two kinds of veneration. We have latria, which is what we give to God alone, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then we have dulia, which we give to all created things of honor. For example, the American flag, if you're an American. A respected picture of your grandmother. Your parents. A statue of St. Anthony. St. Anthony himself. Any of the saints. You give respect, dulia, to your teacher, to the policeman, to your parents. And, of course, we give the highest dulia, the highest reverence to a creature, to the Virgin Mary. She is the greatest creature ever created by God. And so we give her hyperdulia, that is the highest form of veneration, the highest respect. We don't worship Mary as a goddess, but we do give her the highest created respect possible. So Thomas says that according to justice and the sub-virtue of religion, we owe latria, worship, to God alone. And then we also offer, he says, sacrifices, oblations, that's offerings, and first fruits, tithes, 1/10% of our income, and we owe God our vows. If you make a vow to God, you owe it to him. It's your duty to fulfill it. If you make a vow to go on a pilgrimage, you have to go on the pilgrimage. If you make a vow never to drink alcohol or smoke a cigarette, you owe it to God never to drink alcohol or smoke a cigarette. If you make a vow to be celibate, you owe it to God to never practice a sexual act again in your life. Period. Close the book. This is what we owe God according to justice within the sub-virtue of religion. He talks about our prayer. He talks about how superstition is opposed to justice, because superstition states that we can get things in a supernatural or preternatural way without recourse to God. So if I carry a rabbit's foot, that's going to give me power. But the rabbit's foot doesn't have any power from God, and so that's superstitious and it's sinful. It's saying that we could get divine-like favors without God. Very bad. Also, he lists idolatry. If you worship Buddha or a false god and not God, you're not giving God what he deserves. It's like adultery. if you're married to a woman and you have relations with a woman who's not your wife, you're taking away what's due to your wife. So there's only one true God. If you're worshiping another god, Zeus, Buddha, Shiva, you're not giving latria, you're not giving worship to the true God who is owed it. And he talks about, divination, it'd be like palm reading, horoscopes, all that's condemned here. And then also sacrilege, because sacrilege is taking what's holy and treating it as something common. So, for example, you could be sacrilegious about the name of God. You could be sacrilegious about the Eucharist, not giving the Eucharist the veneration he deserves. Then he talks about piety. And this is a word that comes into English that can be a little bit confusing, because piety, we think of, he's a pious Catholic. But piety in the Latin refers more back to what is owed in a civil way, like as a citizen, what we owe our country. So, we might think of this as like patriotism, or maybe a form of nationalism. I think patriotism is the right way. St. Josemaria Escrivá says that as Catholics, we aren't nationalistic, but we are patriotic. There's a distinction there. I think nationalism is saying my country over all others. As long as America succeeds, all other countries can suffer, no big deal. Patriotism wants to see everybody benefit, but has a special love and devotion and piety towards their nation. Right? Just like I love all children, but I have a special devotion to my own children. Just because I have a special devotion to my own children doesn't mean I don't care what happens to other children. I still want to use my finances, my resources, and time to enrich other children, but I have a special priority and love and devotion to my own. So I think that's kind of the best way to understand a false nationalism versus a pious patriotism. And that's what he covers there. That's in question 101. And then he talks about all the other associated connected virtues. He talks about observance. He talks about dulia in 103. We already covered that. He talks about obedience. So if your employer tells you to do something and it's not sinful, it's not against the divine law, you do it. If you're a child and your mom says cut the carrots, you cut the carrots. Or take out the trash, you take out the trash. All of this falls under justice. I think it's worth noting here, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast, and that is the importance of gratitude in being happy and being fulfilled. And it's interesting that Thomas places gratitude and ingratitude under justice. Gratitude, saying thank you, is an obligation. It's not an option, according to Thomas, according to Catholicism, according to Christianity. You are under a divine obligation, a duty, an officium, to say thank you. Say thank you to God. Thank you to your employer. Thank you to your spouse. Thank you to your children and your grandchildren. And thank you to the server who brings you your meal at the restaurant. And thank you to the person who opens the door for you. And thank you to the Uber driver who takes you to the airport. We are required by God to live a life of gratitude. And that's in question 106 and 107 of the second part. So important. Another thing that falls under the virtue of justice is the truth. We talked about this in the sins of language. People deserve the truth. Now, not everything that is true needs to be said. I may know something true about you that's very embarrassing. We'll make it mild. Let's say, you had really bad acne, when you were a kid. That's true. That doesn't mean that if we're in a party, I could say, oh yeah, remember how you had all those pimples and you looked so awful in high school? It's true. You're not lying. You're not bringing about falsity. But it doesn't need to be said. So not everything that's true needs to be said. right? But we should only say what is true. We should not lie to other people. We always have to bear the truth. If we don't bear the truth, if we hide things, we won't be happy, we won't be fulfilled, we won't be virtuous, and people won't trust us. He goes on to talk about boasting. What's wrong with boasting? Boasting is not is wrongfully giving yourself what is due when it's not due to you. So if I go out and say, hey, and I start bragging about being, a 3-star general, I'm giving something unto myself that's not due. It's wrong. And then Thomas goes on to talk about flattery. It's the same way, but the other way around. I could say, oh, you are the best violin player I've ever heard, when you're not. I'm giving you something, I'm giving something to you that's not due to you. Does that make sense? You can say nice things to people, but you don't have to flatter them in a false way and give them what is not due. By the way, I want to go back to boasting. It is not wrong as a Christian, as a person. If you are the best at something, it is not wrong to say that you are. You shouldn't be puffed up and prideful. You could have a sin with pride, but it would not be the sin of boasting. If you won the gold medal in the 100, you can say, I won the gold medal. I am the best in the world. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're not boasting. If you are the greatest chemist on earth, and there's some way to verify that, it's not wrong to say you're the greatest chemist, as long as you're not prideful about it. That's not boasting. Some people think that is boasting. Boasting is when you're saying something false and attributing it to yourself to make yourself look better. Okay, sorry, I just wanted to circle back and say that. And then he talks about covetousness, that is wanting something that is not yours, it's not due to you. This could be coveting material goods. It could be coveting a neighbor's spouse, another person. Or it could be coveting something in someone else's life, like that they have children and I don't have children. They're in a relationship, I'm not in a relationship. They're going on a vacation, I'm not going on a vacation. That covetousness is also against justice, because you're comparing them to the other person and seeing what they have as being obliged and due to you, and therefore being sad about it. Not good for your spirit, not good for your soul, and sinful. There's actually 2 of the 10 commandments are about covetousness. Number 9 and number 10. Number 9, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Number 10, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's good. God is serious about that. It's right up there with murder and adultery and idolatry and taking God's name in vain. Covetousness is really bad for us. And so that pretty much wraps up. He talks about the gift of piety, how it relates to justice, and the precepts of justice. But man, there it is. Questions 57 through 122 in a nutshell, in one podcast. That is the virtue of justice. All right, so before we get to our Latin word of the week and our tip of the week, just a few announcements. You can find this podcast now on YouTube. A lot of people are listening to it via YouTube. Just go to my YouTube channel, Dr. Taylor Marshall, and you'll find it there. Also, I've been so busy lately and excited about the new novel. The sequel to my best-selling novel, Sword and Serpent, is ready to go, and we've put together a launch team. We're choosing 200 readers and giving them a free copy of the book before it comes out to the public to read it and to respond to it before it goes live. And so if you'd like to be one of the earliest readers, to get it for free beforehand, and also to have your name printed in the back. If you're selected as one of the 200 readers, we will print your name in the back of the book. It will be there forever. Your name will be in a published book at the end with a thank you note for me. Please go to my website, taylormarshall.com. There's already been several, I think there's over 300 people who have applied already in the past 24 hours. We opened it up yesterday. If you'd like to be considered to be one of those launch readers, go to taylormarshall.com at the most recent post this week and fill out the very brief application. It'll take you maybe 15 seconds. And we'll let y'all know probably next week who the chosen readers are. That'll be exciting. To learn more, go to swordandserpent.com. And if you haven't read the first book, Sword and Serpent, it's a historical novel that takes place in the year 299 about St. George, Constantine, St. Nicholas, and a bunch of other saints as they go through a pilgrimage through the Roman Empire. And eventually, George encounters a dragon. But I won't tell you what the dragon is or how it works. You got to read the book. Lots of great reviews, a best-selling Christian Catholic novel. It's a great book. Check it out at Amazon.com. The name of the book is Sword and Serpent. The sequel will be coming out in a few months, maybe just in a month and a half. And the title of the sequel is The 10th Region of the Night. The 10th Region of the Night. It refers to an Egyptian myth. This book begins in Egypt about a serpent being slayed just before the rise of the sun, just before the dawning of a new day, the 10th region of the night. And it's an allegory of how Christianity conquered the Roman Empire just at the 10th region of the night, just before dawn. And as I mentioned earlier, if you want to take online classes with me and over 3,000 other people all over the world, check out our online institute, newstthomas.com, where you can earn your certificate in Catholic philosophy or Catholic theology, or your certificate in Catholic apologetics, or this year a certificate we've added in Catholic church history. Learn more at newstthomas.com and check out some of our sample video classes. Okay, our tip of the week is a backpack. Being a teacher, being a professor, I have to carry with me almost always a laptop and books. Sometimes 2 to 6 books, either to teach classes or to do research. And my wife got me this great leather satchel that I carried with me almost the entire time I was doing my PhD. It looked very scholastic. It had a leather flap on it and a brass clasp on it, and it just looked really cool. I had a tweed sports coat with the leather patches on it. It was like the ultimate academic look. Grow out the beard, perfect. The only problem is when you have a laptop or a MacBook and a bunch of books in there and some papers you need to grade, and it's slung over the shoulder, it gets really heavy and tiresome. So eventually I just gave up the look, and I've gone to this sturdy North Face backpack with the padded back and the padded shoulders, and I use this universally. And I was thinking, as I was the tip of the week, I was like, you don't have to be carrying books and a computer. This would be great for moms as they carry things around. My wife carries a stylish diaper bag because she's a stylish woman, but if I were going to carry things, I would carry it in the backpack because you got both shoulders and you can avoid the pain. So the tip of the week would be to explore a backpack. Many of us haven't worn a backpack since we were in the 12th grade, but I think it could be useful, especially if you have to carry things to and from the office. One more cool thing about the backpack is when I had the satchel model, things would slide out of it when I drove around or in the back seat. But the backpack, there's all the zippers, and I can put my glasses, and I got this little pocket where I have a rosary, and I got another little pocket where I keep my headphones, and it's just organized and wonderful. So a simple tip of the week, check out the backpack. Maybe you haven't had one since 12th grade. It's awesome. Loving it. All right, and before we do the Latin word of the week and close up for this week, I do want to give the shout outs to people who have rated it. Over, 536 of you have given a rating over at iTunes. And I want to thank all of you, and especially this week, Sam Timmy, who wrote, Dr. Marshall's podcast is one of the best Catholic podcasts out there. I learned something new with every podcast. I wish I would have had resources like this podcast in high school. I may not have left the church for so many years. His podcast, along with Catholic radio, helped me come back and bring my family with me. Wow, Sam. Thanks for that 5-star review, and thanks for sharing that, and thanks for coming back to the Catholic Church. I'm glad that you and your family are back in the Catholic Church and receiving the Eucharist and receiving all the graces and sacramental realities that we have. I also want to give a shout out to E&M Cowboy, who wrote a 5-star review and a bunch of awesome, nice stuff about me and the podcast. At the end, he says, I highly recommend Dr. Marshall's podcast to anyone who wants to learn more about their Catholic faith. So thanks so much for those 5-star reviews. And if you'd like for me to read your name on the next podcast and give you a shout out, please go over to my website, taylormarshall.com/shout out. When you leave a review there, you'll take it to iTunes. When you leave a review there, it helps the show become more popular in iTunes. So if someone searches in iTunes, Catholic podcast, this one will come up. Not all the podcasts there are all that great. Some of them are really great, but I would like for people to be able to find this. And I think the reason why this show has become so popular with over 1 million downloads is because you, the listeners, have been recommending it to your friends, but also going into iTunes and leaving a review so that iTunes itself knows that this is quality and distributes it to other people for free. And also, while you're over at iTunes, hit the subscribe button, and every week, hopefully, I try to do it every week, you'll get a automatically download this podcast, and a little reminder comes up saying, hey, guess what? Taylor Marshall just put up a podcast. Check it out. It's right there. You can listen to it while you work out, while you drive, or whatever you do when you listen to this podcast. And then the Latin word of the week is justitia. Justitia is the Latin word for justice, and it derives from the Latin word jus, that is I-U-S, which means a law, or it also can mean a right. So justice is basically what all law is based upon. When we talk about social justice or any kind of justice, we're talking about the laws that are set down so there's an equilibrium. There's a balance. I give to you what's due to you. You give to me what's due to me. It's based on the duty and the reciprocal relationship that humans have with each other, as we saw today, not only with each other, but with God. And this is all summed up when Christ says that all the Old Testament can be summed up with love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Right? Charity begins to lift up and elevate justice. All right, well, I'll close with our closing prayer. As I've done in the last several podcasts, some of our listeners have asked if I would just close with a prayer. And so I put together this brief prayer that we could pray together, and maybe I'll change it from time to time, but I kind of like how it is. So if you want to pray with me, please join in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Gracious Father, you love us. Your Son, Jesus Christ, died for us, and in gratitude, we want to know you and to love you in the depths of our broken hearts. Because of your kindness, I repent of my sins, and by the fire of the Holy Spirit, allow me to have a deep, personal relationship with you and to draw other people into your love. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, my brothers and sisters, in Christ, God has a wonderful plan for your life, and you are the apple of his eye. He looks upon you, and he protects you. And until next time, remember that our Lord Jesus Christ said that you are the light of the world and the salt of the earth. So go out there and be salty.